The creepiest secret of Antarctica. The South Magnetic Pole has always attracted not only scientists but also legends. Among polar explorers, strange rumors have long circulated that in those parts, compass needles behave like they've gone insane, that sometimes the radio picks up incomprehensible voices, and that shadows appear on the horizon even though the sun is high and there's not a single elevation in sight. The English explorer Robert Scott dreamed of being the first to reach the South Pole, but fate played a cruel joke on him. He was beaten by the Norwegian Roald Amundsen. When Scott finally reached the goal, all he saw was his rival's flag, planted only a week earlier. His disappointment was so deep that on the way back, he chose a different route, passing through the area of the South Magnetic Pole. That decision proved fatal. Scott and his entire team perished, never making it out. Half a century later, Soviet stations were already operating in Antarctica. One day, from the Mirny base, a group of 6 men set off to repeat the journey to the South Magnetic Pole. Only 2 returned. The official cause, a snowstorm, engine failure, and extreme cold. But among polar workers, the story was different. The survivors didn't just come back exhausted. They barely spoke and had an animal-like terror frozen in their eyes. In 1962, the Americans went next. Their expedition was far better prepared. 17 men, 3 snow vehicles, the best equipment of the time, and constant radio contact with their base. And yet, they returned on just 1 vehicle, gaunt, pale, and with a wild look in their eyes. Doctors immediately sent them home, and the reports stated that the results of the expedition are classified. No photos, no details. After that, only one more group dared to go. Soviet researchers again. One of them, Yuri Efremovich Korshunov, stayed silent for decades. Only shortly before his death did he decide to tell the whole story to a journalist. The account was never published in the USSR, but recently, it surfaced in the American press. It was the polar day, Korshunov began. We had exceptionally rare weather for Antarctica. Sunshine, -30, no wind, no blizzards. In 3 weeks of travel, not a single part broke down. We didn't lose an hour to repairs. Everything was going according to plan until that night. We set up camp at a point that, according to all our measurements, matched the location of the South Magnetic Pole. Everyone was exhausted, so we went to bed early. But none of us could sleep. There was this strange tension in the air, as if it had grown heavier. I couldn't take it anymore and stepped outside the tent. And there, about 300 meters away from us, I saw a glowing sphere. It wasn't just hanging in the air, it was bouncing, like an enormous ball, 100 times the size of a football. With each second, it seemed to come closer. I shouted for the others. Everyone rushed outside. The sphere stopped bouncing and began to slowly roll toward us, changing shape as it moved. It stretched out, turning into something resembling a massive sausage. The front of this sausage suddenly darkened to almost black, and a face began to take shape on it. A face without eyes, but with a wide mouth. No teeth, just a gaping black void. The snow beneath it hissed, as if the thing were red hot. The mouth moved, and I had the eerie impression it was speaking, though I heard no sound. Only a strange vibration inside my head that made me want to cover my ears. Our expedition photographer, Sasha Gorodetsky, ignored the shouts of our leader, Andrei Skoblev, to stay put and walked forward with his camera. He kept clicking the shutter until the creature changed again. It compressed into a narrow, glowing ribbon and seemed to wrap around his head like a halo. Sasha screamed and dropped the camera. The glowing ribbon pulsed around his head, expanding and contracting as if it were breathing. The ice beneath his feet cracked, and the sharp scent of ozone hit my nose, mixed with something acrid, like burning insulation. 2 shots rang out. Skoblev and our doctor, Roma Kustov, fired almost simultaneously. But the sound was wrong. Not the sharp crack of a rifle, but something muffled and explosive, as if a shell had gone off in an enclosed space. The ribbon jerked, burst into sparks and short bolts of lightning. They rained down on Sasha, covering him from head to toe. For a brief moment, he was wrapped in flames, but not flames like from a fire. These were cold, bluish flames that made my teeth ache. I rushed to him. Sasha was lying face down in the snow, motionless. When I turned him over, I realized he was dead. The back of his head, his palms, and his entire back looked charred, and his polar suit had turned into black rags that crumbled at the slightest touch. The camera lying nearby looked as if it had been dipped in molten metal. The body collapsed inward, and the lens had sagged like a glass tear. We tried to contact Murney via radio, but the air was filled with a roaring, screeching noise, as if thousands of metal plates were being scraped together. Occasionally, a signal broke through for a fraction of a second, but not a single word could be made out. We spent 3 days in that cursed spot, and during all that time, a magnetic storm raged. Sometimes it seemed we heard voices, faint, barely audible, but each of us knew they couldn't be real. Around us was nothing but the endless ice desert. We buried Sasha right there in the snow. No one suggested a cross or even a marker. Everyone just wanted to leave. On the 4th day, the spheres returned. First one, hovering directly above the fresh mound of Sasha's grave. It stayed there motionless, as if studying us. A minute later, 2 more appeared beside it, materializing out of nowhere. They didn't fall from the sky or rise from the ground. They simply were there. They began to descend slowly, then spread apart, tracing complex patterns in the air, as if dancing to some rhythm only they knew. Skobelev filmed with another camera, while I worked with the instruments, trying to capture spectral and electromagnetic data. The needles on the gauges behaved as if someone were shaking them violently, jerking, darting back and forth. Kostov and Borisov stood a little apart, rifles ready. They opened fire when one of the spheres began to stretch into the same sausage form. A burst of light blinded me for a couple of seconds. When my vision returned, the spheres were gone, but the heavy scent of ozone hung in the air, and in the snow lay Kostov and Borisov. Their faces were frozen in a silent scream, their eyes glassy and dead. And then we saw Skobelev. He was swaying on his feet, his hands pressed to his face. The camera lay about 5 meters away. I ran to him, pulled his hands away, and felt a chill run down my spine. His eyes were vacant, unrecognizing. It was as if not a single thought remained in his head. From that moment, he was like a child. He didn't speak, only whimpered, soiled himself, spilled water, and wouldn't chew food. We had to pour liquid porridge into his mouth just to keep him alive. We couldn't even bury Kostov and Borisov. We had no strength left. All we wanted was to get out of there as quickly as possible. But it felt like something was following us. We began the return trip in the only snow vehicle we had left. We strapped Skobelev to the back seat. He kept trying to stand up and wander off, mumbling incoherently. Sometimes he would start quietly laughing at nothing, and that was somehow worse than his crying. On the 3rd day of the journey back, we noticed that the compasses were twitching again, and the radio gave nothing but static and broken scraps of sound. Several times we thought we saw tiny lights flickering on the horizon, but when we stopped the vehicle, they vanished. At night, we had the same nightmare, over and over. We stood on the ice, with dozens of spheres hanging above us. Each one shifted and moved like it was alive, slowly opening its black mouths. When we woke, the inside of the tent was colder than it should have been, and frost coated even the inner walls of our sleeping bags. One night, I stepped out of the cab to check the cargo straps and froze in place. Directly behind us, on the flat snow plain, were deep, perfectly round depressions in the ice. They stretched in a neat chain, as if something had bounced along the snow in equal intervals. But we had driven that section only an hour earlier, and back then, nothing was there. By morning, Skobelev was worse. He stopped drinking water, constantly licking his lips and muttering about light and voices. His eyes watered, his pupils were dilated, and his hands trembled so much he couldn't hold a spoon. When we finally saw the buildings of Murney, we felt relief, but it didn't last. Skobelev died the very first night. The doctors said it was heart failure and mild frostbite, but I knew that wasn't it. His body looked wrong, as if his skin had turned slightly translucent, and the veins beneath it were darker than they should have been. We told our superiors everything. Surprisingly, they believed us, but immediately reminded us that we had no proof. The cameras had been burned or melted, the instruments recorded only chaotic spikes, and the bodies of our comrades remained out there in the snow. Months later, I overheard 2 station medics talking. They were discussing Skobelev's autopsy. One said they had found traces of some unknown tissue masses in his brain. Not tumors, not blood clots, but something strange, Something not human. I asked if there would be another expedition to that place. They told me no plans and said it was better to avoid it altogether. But I know the truth, and I know something else. A week before that conversation, I stepped outside the barracks at night to get some fresh air. The sky was clear, the stars sharp and bright. And then, far on the horizon, I saw it. A faint blue sphere that flared for just a moment before going dark again. It didn't fall, it didn't rise, it simply appeared. I watched it until I felt a faint vibration in my head, the same one I'd felt that night when Sasha died. I went back inside and shut the door, and I never looked in that direction again. If anyone ever goes there again, they should know the danger isn't the cold or the wind. It's what wakes up when people come too close.
Darkness beneath the ice.
I had always wanted to work in Antarctica. Most people imagine it as a place for rugged explorers or brilliant scientists, the kind of dream you toss around over a drink but never actually chase. For me, it was an obsession. I wanted to see the end of the Earth, a place untouched, where the rules of the world felt different. In 1988, the National Science Foundation selected me for the winter crew at McMurdo Station. Back then, McMurdo wasn't the neat, modular facility you see in brochures now. It was a jumble of weather-worn buildings, the air thick with the smell of diesel, and a constant background hum from the generators. There were always dark corners in the storage bays where the light didn't reach, and in those shadows, you could almost convince yourself something was watching. My assignment was simple on paper: monitor one of the deep-core drilling rigs about 5 miles from the station. We were pulling ice cores to study ancient climate records, or so the official story went. Among the winter crew, there were whispers that some of the data went straight to military hands. It was a lonely job. The drill site was a cluster of temporary shelters set up over a deep borehole, with a portable lab, a generator hut, and the drilling rig itself. The wind could be deafening out there, a constant high-pitched howl that made you feel like the world was empty except for you and the ice. During my second month, the drill jammed. The day was cloudless, the kind of eerie Antarctic afternoon when the sun barely schemes the horizon and everything glows in strange shades of orange and blue. The bit froze mid-rotation, and the motor groaned to a stop. We shut down the system and started the long process of winching it up. It took over 4 hours. When the bit finally emerged, everyone went quiet. Stuck to the metal teeth were fragments of something dark, almost black. Not ice. Not rock. The surface was smooth, almost oily, and when I touched it through my glove, I felt a faint vibration, like holding an electric toothbrush against my palm. Dan, our geologist, scraped a piece off. In the sunlight, it seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Could be ancient volcanic debris, he muttered, but his tone lacked conviction. We bagged the samples, tagged them, and sent them back to McMurdo for analysis. That night, I couldn't sleep. The heating in our small bunk room rattled like it always did, but beneath it I kept hearing something else, a slow, deliberate tapping. I told myself it was just the pipes. 2 days later, the seismograph in our drill tent began showing strange patterns. Not like an ice shift, not like wind vibration, this was irregular, pulsing, like something moving below. A few days after that, people started having dreams. First it was Mike, the mechanic. Then Carla, one of the techs. They each described standing alone on the ice above the drill site, staring down at their boots while faint knocking came from below. Sometimes, they said, the knocking was followed by whispers they couldn't quite understand. Mike swore one of the whispers called him by name. I laughed it off at first, but then I had the dream too. Only in mine, the knocking wasn't faint, it was right beneath my feet. And I swear I saw the ice beneath me bulge upward, just slightly, like something pressing from below. 10 days after we found the fragments, Harris vanished. He was a quiet guy, one of our mechanics, but solid and reliable. That morning, his parka and boots were missing from the rack. No one had seen him leave. We split into pairs and searched the area. The wind was low, so we found his tracks quickly, deep, steady footprints leading in a straight line toward the drill site. They didn't meander. They didn't stop. They went straight to the borehole, and ended. I leaned over the opening, my safety harness pulling tight, and shone my headlamp down. The light faded long before hitting bottom. Just before I pulled back, I thought I saw something shift in the darkness, like the black itself rippled. We radioed McMurdo. 4 hours later, a convoy arrived. The men who stepped out weren't NSF staff. No station patches, no research gear. They sealed the borehole with a metal cap, bolted it, then welded it shut. The dark fragments were packed into an unmarked crate and loaded onto a snowcat. No one told us anything. The next morning, we were told the drill site was closed for structural instability, and that we were to return to McMurdo for reassessment. No one was allowed near the site again. McMurdo went into a week-long lockdown. No flights in or out. The building where the samples had been taken was guarded around the clock. I saw men in hazard suits wheel out sealed barrels late at night and load them directly onto a military transport plane. Harris was officially listed as accidentally lost in hazardous terrain. Everyone who'd been there knew that was a lie. After the lockdown ended, life at McMurdo tried to return to normal. But the dreams didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. More vivid. In mine, the knocking had turned into scratching, slow, deliberate scrapes against the underside of the ice. Sometimes, in the dream, the ice cracked and a dark shape began to rise toward me before I woke up. One night, I heard real knocking. I know how it sounds: Antarctic isolation, lack of sleep, a mind playing tricks. But I was awake. The sound came from beneath the floor of my bunk room, 3 slow knocks, then silence. Carla started showing signs of stress. She'd spend long minutes staring out toward the drill sector, even though it was off limits. She told me she felt like someone was calling to her from out there. 2 days later, I woke to find her bed empty. Her parka was gone. Her tracks led in the same direction as Harris's. This time, we didn't even call McMurdo security. We knew what would happen. The next day, another convoy arrived. More welding. More sealed crates. By the time winter ended, there were only half as many of us as when we'd arrived. Officially, 2 were lost and 1 had been evacuated for medical reasons. Unofficially, we all knew the truth: something was under the ice. Something that wanted people to come to it. For years, I didn't talk about it. Then, in 2004, I met a glaciologist named Whitman who'd been stationed at McMurdo that year. I asked him, half as a joke, if the old drill sector was still off limits. His smile vanished. He told me a new deep core project there had been shut down abruptly. 2 researchers had vanished in a storm. One of them had told him, a week before disappearing, that she'd been dreaming of standing on the ice and hearing voices. I don't know what's under that part of Antarctica. But it's not dead. Some nights in my Denver apartment, I think I hear it again, faint tapping, like a message from miles below. And every time, I remember what Harris once said to me. If it's knocking, Tom, maybe it wants us to open the door.